The bus ride into Lincoln Heights, Missouri stretched long and quiet like the town itself. Seated by the window, Marcus rested his head against the glass, watching. As the city gave way to rows of nearly identical houses and wide, empty streets. He'd moved before too many times if he was honest, but this one felt different. His mom had taken a better job. His uncle called it a fresh start. But Marcus knew better. A fresh start isn't always a clean one, not when you look like he does in a place like this. The moment he stepped onto Ridgemont High's campus, he could feel it. Conversations dipped as he passed. Eyes flicked up, then quickly away like they hadn't been staring. The teachers smiled just a bit too carefully, and their voices carried a rehearsed kind of politeness, the kind that didn't settle right. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd been through this before. Keep your head down, do the work, don't give them a reason. For the first few class periods, that's what he did. He answered when called on. He stayed quiet. He kept his focus tight locked in on the lessons. But by lunchtime, that old familiar feeling crept in like being watched through a pane of glass no one wanted to acknowledge. With a tray in hand, Marcus scanned the cafeteria. Groups had already claimed their territory. No one waved him over. A few kids leaned in to whisper as he passed. He finally spotted a seat next to a guy absorbed in his phone, didn't seem interested in talking. That would do. But before he could even sit down, a voice cut through the chatter. "You lost or something," Marcus turned. The boy smirking at him had sun-bleached hair, the kind of tan you only get from money and time. Confidence dripped off him like cologne. His friends at the table looked on, waiting for the show. "Didn't know I needed a map," Marcus replied, steady and calm. The boy chuckled, still lounging in his seat. "Just making sure. Not a lot of new faces around here." Marcus caught what he meant, what he didn't say out loud. He held the boy's stare for a long second, unreadable. "Well," he said softly, "guess I'm the exception." The smirk deepened, but something flickered behind it, interest maybe, or something colder. "Welcome to Ridgemont," the boy said. Marcus said nothing. He just sat down and picked up his fork. And in that moment, he understood this wasn't just another school, and this wasn't going to be just another move. This was the beginning of something else entirely. At first, it was just the whispers, the kind of comments meant to sound like they weren't meant to be heard, except they always were. Didn't know they let guys like him in here. Wonder how long he'll last. Marcus had heard it all before. The tone never changed, not in Alabama, not in North Carolina, and certainly not here in Missouri. Same words, same delivery, just a different zip code. He didn't react. That was the rule. His uncle's voice still lived in his head. "Don't give them what they want. They'll get tired eventually. Keep walking." But not everyone got tired. Bryce Turner didn't get tired. Bryce was the quarterback, the student body, darling. His dad owned a row of car dealerships up and down the county line. Everyone knew the Turners. Their name was on billboards, booster plaques, even the gym scoreboard. And Bryce carried that name like a crown, grinning like he owned the place, because in some ways he did. From the start, Bryce watched Marcus with that smile that wasn't quite a smile. The kind that said, "You're not one of us." The first real test came by the lockers. Marcus had just finished third period, swapping books, earbuds, and trying to get through the day without incident. That's when a shoulder hit him hard from behind, slamming him into the locker door with a metallic thud. "Oops," came the voice behind him. "Didn't see you there, Bryce." His tone sweet as syrup, but twice as sticky. Marcus stayed calm, didn't even blink. He pulled his notebook from the shelf, shut the locker slowly, and turned around with that same unreadable look. "Didn't say much, huh?" Bryce said, cocking his head. "That's cool. Mysterious. I like it." For just a second, something in Bryce's expression flickered. A sliver of uncertainty. But then one of his friends, Nick, or maybe Kyle, snorted something under his breath, and the moment passed. Bryce flashed his grin again. "Catch you later, new guy." Marcus watched them stroll down the hallway, laughing about nothing. The background noise returned like a wave. That was strike one. Strike two came in the cafeteria. Marcus was heading toward the trash bins, minding his own, when a leg shot out across his path. It wasn't subtle, wasn't meant to be. He barely caught himself before falling, tray clattering just shy of the floor. The laughter was immediate. "Relax, man." "It was a joke," Bryce called out, both palms raised like some kind of peacekeeper. Marcus didn't look at him, didn't give him that satisfaction. He stepped over the outstretched leg, dumped his tray, and walked away. "Too easy," someone muttered behind him. His hands curled into fists, but he didn't turn back. "A lion doesn't flinch when hyenas bark," his uncle used to say. But inside, it was starting to wear thin. The third time it stopped being a game. School was over. Marcus had stayed late in the library killing time. His mom wouldn't be home from work for another couple hours, and the quiet suited him better than the noise of home. When he stepped outside, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He barely made it 10 steps before a cold splash hit his back. It wasn't water. The sticky feel told him it was soda ice and syrup soaking into his hoodie. Laughter broke out behind him. He turned. Bryce was standing there, flanked by Nick Kyle and a couple other guys whose names didn't matter. A red cup dangled from Bryce's hand, its contents now running down Marcus's spine. "My bad," Bryce said, shrugging. "Didn't see you there." The silence that followed was thick. A few students lingered near the lot's edge, watching, waiting to see what would happen. Marcus inhaled slow and deep. Held it. "Come on, man. Say something." Bryce pressed, stepping closer. Marcus didn't. He moved to walk past him. That's when Bryce shoved him. Hard. No jokes, no pretense, just force. Marcus stumbled, caught himself, and froze. The breath in his chest felt tight. His jaw clenched. "What's wrong?" Nick sneered. "You scared?" All his life, Marcus had been told to walk away, told that control was power, that being still in the face of ignorance was the greater fight. But this wasn't ignorance. This was a challenge. Bryce wasn't trying to mess with him, he was trying to break him. Marcus let his backpack slide to the ground. Slowly, deliberately. "Oh, you finally got something to say?" Bryce asked, eyebrows raised. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he rolled his shoulders back the way he'd done 1,000 times in the gym, with his uncle's gloves on. Bryce opened his mouth to say something else. He never got the words out. Marcus moved first. One feint with his left, just enough to make Bryce shift, then a sharp right hook straight to the ribs. The sound was sharp and wet, like something giving way. Bryce gasped, all the air knocked from his lungs. Marcus didn't stop. A pivot, then a clean uppercut. Bryce's head snapped back. His knees buckled. And just like that, he hit the pavement. Hard. Silence. Shock. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Marcus stepped back, adjusted his hoodie, his breath steady and even. Bryce groaned on the asphalt, one hand reaching for air. Marcus looked at him. "You done?" No reply. Just coughing, his eyes moved to the others. "Anybody else?" Nobody moved. Marcus slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked away. He didn't run. He didn't look back. But he knew that whatever line had existed before that invisible one between him and them, it had been crossed. And not just by Bryce. By morning, the whole school would know, and nothing would be the same again. By the time Marcus stepped through the school doors the next morning, the story had already made its rounds. He didn't need to check his phone. He didn't need to overhear the conversations. The look said everything. Some kids stared like they were seeing him for the first time. Some nodded like they respected what he'd done, even if they wouldn't say so out loud. A few freshmen who hadn't said a word to him before were suddenly whispering and watching him like he was some kind of legend, and Bryce nowhere to be seen. That didn't surprise Marcus. A punch like the one he'd landed, especially in front of half the student parking lot, wasn't something a guy like Bryce bounced back from quickly. Not when image was everything. Nick and Kyle didn't say anything either. They avoided eye contact, kept their distance in the hall. The power shift was subtle, but Marcus felt it in the way space opened up around him. He walked the same halls, but the air had changed. In class, he sat down like usual, pulled out his notebook, and went to work. His face didn't show a thing. But inside, the weight of it all was heavier than he expected. Not guilt, not exactly. Just the quiet noise of it all settling on his shoulders. He hadn't wanted a scene, but now he was the scene. At lunch, the noise dropped when he walked into the cafeteria. Conversation slowed, heads turned. Even those who hadn't seen the fight had clearly heard the details. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his tray steady in his hands. Man didn't know the new guy had hands, someone murmured. Bryce had it coming. Another voice added a little louder. Heard he's not coming back for a week, said a third with something close to awe. Marcus sat down without reacting, picked at his food in silence. He wasn't there for glory. He wasn't looking for approval. He just wanted to eat his lunch. But then came a different kind of whisper, a softer one but colder. He's just another violent thug. The words floated over from a nearby table. Two girls, one of them wearing a silver necklace that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. The one who said it had the kind of expression that made it clear her words weren't meant to sting. They were meant to define. Marcus turned his head just slightly, just enough to let her know he'd heard. She looked away quick and guilty, and still it hit him in the chest like a slow punch, all of it. The weight of being seen not as someone who defended himself, but as someone who fulfilled their worst expectations. It didn't matter that he'd held back twice, that he'd swallowed the insult, stepped over the trip, walked away from the locker shove. One swing and suddenly to some folks, he was exactly who they'd always assumed he was. No one mentioned that Bryce had gone looking for a fight, that he'd thrown the first shove, that Marcus hadn't touched him until there was no other choice. That didn't seem to matter. Because for kids like Marcus, the rules were different. The line between restraint and aggression blurred too easily, and the labels came too fast. Still, he didn't regret it. Bryce had pushed hard, and Marcus had made sure he didn't walk away thinking he had won. But it left a mark deeper than a bruise. It wasn't just about fists anymore. It was about how people had already made up their minds no matter what he did. He'd spent years training and learning to breathe through the anger, to channel it, to walk away. His uncle had taught him that real strength wasn't about what you could do, it was about what you chose not to. And he'd believed that, still did. But now sitting in that cafeteria, every eye either admiring, fearing, or judging him, it didn't feel like he'd won anything. It just felt like a door had closed behind him, and the way forward had gotten narrower. As he pushed his tray away, appetite gone, he realized something important. What happened in that parking lot wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning. Because walking away from a shove was one kind of strength. But what came next, that was going to take something much harder. The rest of the week passed like a slow wave. Each day brought the same stares, the same quiet whispers trailing behind Marcus like shadows. Some looked at him with wide eyes and nods of approval, like he'd done what they only dreamed of. Others kept their distance, treating him like a warning sign, something dangerous you didn't poke twice. And then there were those who couldn't decide. In the hallways, Marcus noticed how space still opened up around him, but it wasn't the kind of space that came with respect. It felt more like fear, or worse, suspicion. The weight of that difference pressed heavy on his chest. He'd spent years perfecting control, walking the line his uncle had taught him to walk. He hadn't exploded. He hadn't lost it. He hadn't even raised his voice. But none of that seemed to matter. All people saw was the punch. Bryce still hadn't come back. Rumor had it he was nursing some bruised ribs and an even more bruised ego. Nick and Kyle stayed quiet like ghosts of the boys they were when they used to trail behind him laughing. They weren't looking for round two. Some kids started nodding at Marcus and the hall freshmen, mostly younger ones, who saw him as someone not to mess with. A few even smiled. But it was the kind of smile you gave a storm on the horizon, cautious, admiring, but uncertain. It wasn't trust. It was tension wrapped in curiosity. and the label followed close behind him, always just a step away. At lunch, he heard it again. Not loud, never loud, just enough to sting. Violent thug. He didn't even turn around this time. He knew the voice, same girl from before. The one who couldn't look him in the eye the first time she said it. He sat with his tray, pushed food around without eating. It was strange how a single word could feel heavier than fists. He hadn't come to Ridgemont looking for a fight. All he'd wanted was a quiet place to get through school, to let his mom rest easier at night, to make his uncle proud. He'd worked so hard to stay invisible, to follow every unspoken rule. But that's the thing, no matter how quiet you are, some folks already have your story written. And now, no matter what he did, they'd flip to the chapter they wanted. One afternoon, just before the final bell, Marcus stayed late at the gym. The school was quieter now, almost peaceful. He liked the echo of basketballs on the polished wood, the muffled noise of cleats across the field outside. He was tying his sneakers when Coach Harrison stepped into view. "Got a minute?" the coach asked, nodding toward the door. Marcus hesitated. He half expected a lecture, maybe even a warning, but Coach didn't have that look in his eyes. It wasn't disappointment. It was something else. They walked together in silence across the field, the sky slowly turning gold with the setting sun. The football team was finishing up practice, their shouts distant and rhythmic. "I heard what happened," Coach said finally. Marcus nodded, jaw tight. He waited for the rest. "I figured you had your reasons." That made Marcus glance over. Coach wasn't accusing him. He wasn't poking around for gossip. He was just saying it, like he already understood. "I've seen that look before," Coach continued, folding his arms. "On a lot of young men who've been forced to carry too much too early." Marcus swallowed hard. He didn't say anything. "You a fighter?" Coach asked. Marcus gave a small shrug. "Been boxing since I was a kid." Coach let out a low whistle. "Yeah, I could tell. That wasn't just anger in the parking lot. That was training, control." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of what to do with the compliment. "But let me ask you something," Coach said, turning to face him fully. "Did that fight change anything?" Marcus blinked. "What do you mean? Do you think Bryce learned something? You think those kids whispering about you, they see you any different now?" Marcus looked down at the grass, scuffed his shoe against the dirt. "Some do, some don't. Doesn't really matter, I guess." Coach nodded thoughtfully. "That's the truth of it, son. People like Bryce, they don't stay down long. He'll be back. He'll run his mouth." The story starts over. Marcus didn't argue. He already knew. "But you," Coach added, tapping his chest, "you're different. You've got something most of those boys don't. You've got control. You've got purpose. And I've been thinking, what if we put that to better use?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Better use, I've been talking to the wrestling coach. Told him I've got a few names he should look at. I think you'd be a good fit." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Wrestling coach grinned. "Look, I know you can handle yourself, but there's a big difference between winning a fight and learning how to own your strength, how to shape it. I've seen too many boys like you get boxed into someone else's story, never get the chance to write their own." Marcus stayed quiet, letting the words settle. "You already proved you're not someone to mess with," Coach said, voice gentler now. "Now prove there's more to you than that." They stood in silence as the sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the field. That night, back home in his room, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his uncle's old boxing gloves. He picked them up, felt the worn leather in his hands. So many times those gloves had helped him hold it in, had helped him not fight. But this was different. Coach had seen something in him. Not just fists, not just reaction, potential. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus wondered what might happen if he stopped defending who he was and started becoming who he wanted to be. The week wore on with a kind of quiet weight. Bryce still hadn't shown his face at school, and the boys who used to trail behind him, Nick, Kyle, a few others, no longer had much to say. They weren't avoiding Marcus out of fear exactly. It was more like uncertainty, like they didn't know how to place him anymore, so they chose silence instead. Marcus didn't mind. He'd gotten used to being alone. Still, the space around him felt different now. Not empty, but tense. He could feel eyes on him in the cafeteria, hear the whispers tucked between bites of food. That's him, they'd say. Or, he's the one who dropped Bryce. Some voices carried admiration. Others held something colder. He kept walking. He didn't respond. But inside he felt it. That growing sense of something unfinished. Something unsettled. The punch had stopped the moment, but it hadn't stopped the story. If anything, it had started a new one, and Marcus wasn't sure yet how it would end. One afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip low behind the football field, Marcus stepped out of the gym after a workout. He wasn't expecting to see Coach Harrison waiting for him, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the players wind down their drills on the grass. "Got a minute?" Coach asked. Marcus gave a small nod. Yeah. They started walking along the edge of the field. The sky was streaked with orange and gold, and the late-day breeze carried the sound of whistles and cleats crunching against turf. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Coach said after a while, "about what you've been through, what you did." Marcus didn't answer, not right away. He was still unsure if this was leading toward a reprimand or another offer. "I watched the video," Coach added softly. Marcus turned to him. "There's a video?" Coach nodded. "Not much of one, just some grainy footage from someone's phone. But enough to see what happened. Enough to know you weren't the one looking for a fight." Marcus sighed. "Doesn't change how people see it." No, Coach agreed. "It doesn't. But it can change what you do next." They walked a few more paces in silence. Then Coach stopped and looked at him. "You've got something a lot of boys your age don't," he said. "You've got control, not just physical strength, but discipline. You stayed calm until you didn't have a choice." Marcus looked down at the track beneath his shoes. "Felt like I lost something that day." Coach nodded. "Maybe you did. Or maybe you just let people see a piece of you they weren't ready for." Marcus looked up. "So what now?" Coach smiled a little sideways. "That depends. What do you want?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I'm tired of feeling like I have to defend who I am. Like one mistake makes me the bad guy." "You're not the bad guy," Coach said. "But people will try to make you into whatever makes them comfortable. You don't owe them that. What you do owe yourself is a choice." He let the words hang in the air, then continued. "I've been talking with Coach Davis from wrestling. Told him I might have someone who's worth a shot. Someone who's got a foundation, a real fighter's mindset. But more than that, someone who understands when to use it and when to hold it back." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You think I'd be good at wrestling? I know you'd be good at it, but that's not why I'm bringing it up." Then why Coach turned to face him fully. Because the ring or the mat, it's a place where your strength isn't feared. It's respected. It's shaped. It becomes something more than just defense. It becomes direction. Marcus took that in. The idea of using what he had for more than just reacting, for building something. "You already showed everyone what happens when they push too far," Coach said. "Now it's time to show them what happens when you lead." They stood there as the sun dipped lower. The shadows stretched long across the grass. "You don't have to say yes," Coach added. "Just think about it. You've got more to offer than fists, Marcus. I see it. It's time you saw it too." That night back home, Marcus pulled down the small wooden box from his closet shelf. Inside were his uncle's old gloves, weathered from years of use, the leather creased and dark at the palms. He ran his fingers across the stitching, remembering the first time he'd worn them. His uncle had placed them gently on his hands and said, "A good fighter knows when not to fight. That's what makes you dangerous in the best way." He'd lived by that lesson, still believed in it, but maybe there was more to learn. Coach wasn't telling him to stop being strong. He was offering him a way to guide in it, to take that coiled, careful power inside him and turn it towards something that could last. Marcus stared at the gloves a moment longer. Then he closed the box, not with hesitation, but with quiet purpose. There was more to him than one moment in a parking lot, and maybe it was time to start showing the world. The following days slipped by like quiet pages turning in a book. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just steady, watchful silence. Bryce still hadn't returned to school, and no one seemed eager to bring him up anymore. The students who used to orbit around him had scattered. Nick now hung closer to the back of the cafeteria, and Kyle had found a new group of juniors to laugh with. It was like the center of gravity had shifted, and everyone was still learning how to walk again. Marcus noticed it. He noticed everything now. The way some kids still flinched when he walked past like a reflex they couldn't help. The way others gave him a wide berth, not from fear, but from something deeper uncertainty maybe. Not knowing if he was the guy who stood up for himself or the guy who snapped. He was neither. He was both. And he was tired of being misunderstood. Coach Harrison hadn't pushed him. After their talk by the track, he gave Marcus space. But the offer still echoed in Marcus's head like a door slightly ajar. Wrestling, a new path, a chance to use what he'd learned all those years in the garage, not to survive, but to grow. And still Marcus hesitated, not because he didn't want it, but because he wasn't sure he was allowed to want it. People already thought they knew him, and he'd spent so long just trying to stay out of the way that stepping into something new, something public, something visible felt risky. But that Friday afternoon, he walked past the wrestling room after class and paused. The door was cracked open. Inside, a few guys were drilling on the mats, grappling, tumbling, panting, with the kind of effort that didn't need an audience. There were no crowds, no cheering, just movement grit and the sound of skin on vinyl. It was quiet power, and Marcus couldn't look away. He stood there longer than he meant to, just watching. And for the first time in weeks, something stirred in him that didn't feel like anger or exhaustion. It felt like possibility. That night, as the house settled into its usual stillness, Marcus found himself once again sitting on his bed, those old boxing gloves in his lap. The room around him was dim, only the glow from his desk lamp lit the space. He remembered when his uncle first gave him those gloves. He'd been 9, maybe 10. Small for his age, quiet, thoughtful. Too thoughtful, his uncle used to say. The first time he put them on, they'd felt heavy foreign, but over time they became an extension of him. Not for hurting, for knowing he could hurt, but choosing not to. Marcus traced the stitching, now thumbs brushing the seams. So much of his life had been about not reacting, about stepping aside, letting things roll off his back, about holding everything inside. And for the most part, it had worked. Until Bryce. And even then, it wasn't rage that drove him. It was a decision, a line crossed, a moment where silence no longer protected him. But what came after that quiet space where people turned your choices into their own definitions? That had been the hardest part. He sighed, leaned forward, and rested his forearms on his knees. Coach Bay had said something else that stuck with him. There's a difference between winning a fight and owning your power. Marcus didn't want to win another fight. He wanted to own it. By Monday morning, Marcus stood outside the wrestling room door again. Only this time he knocked. The assistant coach, a lean older man with salt and pepper stubble, opened the door with a raised eyebrow. "Can I help you?" Marcus shifted his weight. "Coach Harrison said I should talk to you about maybe trying out." The man studied him a moment, then gave a nod. "You box." "Since I was a kid." "Good base." "You ever wrestle?" Marcus shook his head. "Not really." The coach smiled. "You willing to learn?" "Yes, sir." That was all he needed. "Grab some gear. We'll see what you've got." The next hour was a blur of motion, awkward at first, then rhythm, then instinct. Wrestling was different from boxing. More contact, more balance, more thinking while moving. But Marcus picked it up faster than he expected. His footwork was solid, his reactions sharp, and more than anything, He listened. When practice ended, he was sweating sore and breathing like he'd run a mile uphill. But he felt light, not from the workout, but from what it meant. He had chosen this, not because he was angry, not because he had to prove something, but because he could. As he pulled off his headgear and wiped his face with a towel, he caught Coach Harrison walking past the doorway. Their eyes met. Coach didn't say a word, just nodded once. Marcus nodded back. And in that quiet, simple moment, something shifted. Something stronger than fists, louder than whispers, and deeper than the stories people told about him. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was building something on his own terms, and he wasn't turning back. Wrestling didn't change the world overnight. There were still whispers in the hallways, still looks that lingered a little too long, still a few kids who held on to old ideas even after Bryce returned quieter and humbler than before. Marcus knew better than to expect anything different, but something had changed in him. Each day he showed up to practice learning moves that demanded focus, balance, and patience. He was building more than muscle. He was building trust in himself again. Trust in the idea that his strength wasn't dangerous, it was steady, it was earned. The coaches saw it. His teammates started to too, and slowly so did a few others. It didn't come with applause. There were no speeches, no grand apologies. But now when Marcus walked through the halls of Ridgemont High, he wasn't just the kid from the parking lot. He was the one who stayed, who trained, who wrestled hard and helped others up when the match was done. He hadn't lost who he was. He just learned how to carry it differently. One evening after practice, Coach Harrison found Marcus alone stretching by the edge of the mat. The gym lights cast a soft glow over the empty room. "You've come a long way," Coach said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Still got more to go." Coach nodded. "That's the right way to think about it." There was a pause, the kind filled with something unspoken, mutual respect maybe. Then Coach added, "You didn't let that one moment define you. That takes more strength than most people ever find." Marcus didn't say anything right away. He just looked down at his hands steady, now open, and felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't throwing a punch, it's choosing when not to. Real strength isn't about who hits hardest. It's about who stands firm even when misunderstood. It's about growing beyond what the world expects and becoming something more on your own terms. When you carry that kind of strength with grace, the world doesn't change for you, but you change how you move through it, and that changes everything. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe it reminded you of someone you knew, or a moment in your own life when you had to decide what kind of strength to carry. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about real people, quiet courage, and the choices that shape us, I hope you'll stick around. There's always more to tell, and I'd be honored to share it with you.